Now, in this video, on the PHI1105W, remember that's a Stephanus number, part 1. So I'm going to do 2 little videos on 187. Part 1, sensation, perception, judgment, and we're looking at the third definition of knowledge, namely knowledge as judgment, right? So episteme as doxa, right? We saw episteme. We were talking about previous as aesthesis, right? Knowledge as perception. We've looked and gone through all that, the master argument, etc., etc., etc. So now we're shifting gears here. We're still after what is this episteme stuff, and now it's on to this new thing of judgment, or to use the Greek term, doxa. All right, so that's kind of, when you think about it, that's where we get words like orthodox, right? Ortho meaning straight. So straight belief, aligned belief, right? Hetero meaning other, so heterodox, right? Other belief. All right, so the notion of belief, and think of belief also in the same kind of sense as judgment. So belief, judgment, when you're believing something about the world, you're making a judgment, which is different than a perception. However, I'm going to dig a little bit into the distinction between the term perception and sensation. So there's a number of concepts that we have to think about. You just have to memorize them and get them straight. Keep them in order. It's not all that tough, but if you don't memorize what term goes with what idea, you're going to be hopelessly confused. But there's only a couple of things to memorize. But get it all straight and you'll be just fine. All right, so as a recap, so I'm going to back up a little bit from 187 and look at 186b to c. Socrates talks about upon birth, there are all kinds of things that happen. And so specifically when, like a human being or animals or whatever are born, there's all kinds of things that can reach the soul via the body. So the body is kind of like a transmitter of what's going on in the environment down inside the body to reach the soul. And these things are bodily experiences, right? So, you think about little puppies and babies and things like that. They react to their environment. They feel that it's too cold or too warm or whatever. They immediately, shall we say, these sensations are reaching the soul, and they're natural perceptions upon birth. Now, when the little newborn, whatever it is, human or pup or whatever, these natural perceptions come in, but they're, shall we say, they're very raw. You could use sort of a term like they're just, shall we say, raw feels or just raw sensations. So when we talk about this sort of low level, before any kind of interpretation is going on, well, there's a little bit because, babies, when they feel cold, they'll yell or scream and they don't like it. But they're not, like, a baby isn't ready or to say, well, it is cold in here and I don't like it. That's a much higher level kind of cognitive performance, right? Not like just simply feeling the cold and reacting. So these, upon birth, you have these natural perceptions like raw feel. Sometimes philosophers use the term qualia. There's a variety of them, but just think of them as just pure sensations. So you start off with that. However, that's not where things end, right? Because we then act upon these, our soul moves, or we start thinking, whatever terminology you want to use. We make or do calculations, make decisions upon these natural perceptions. And that's doxa now. So that's like where you're getting in from the realm of just raw feels to thinking about those raw feels, right? Interpreting those raw feels, having beliefs that involve the raw feels, but you're saying something like you go from shivering to say, man, it's cold in here. Well, shivering is a different reaction than saying it is cold in here, because it is cold in here is now starting to conceptualize the raw feel of shivering. So that's the thing. What's coming into play, to use, kind of get away from the terminology here, but just to use everyday language, it would be like moving from a pure observation to a comment on what you're observing. From shivering to, wow, it's cold in here. Two different things, but they're not totally unrelated. All right. So as we make these calculations, you know, you do comparisons, memory use, right? So you can have a particular raw sensation of I don't know, carrot. And then today you have another raw sensation of carrot. And you conceptualize, shall we say, the two carrot sensations, the current one that you're having and the previous one that you have, drawing upon your memory. So now you can have a belief like, and you say, this carrot that I'm tasting today, yeah, that's what I ate yesterday, right? Or you might say, oh, carrots again. I'm sick of these things. Again, you're using a variety of mental functions, or in Plato's language, functions of the soul, like comparison of a memory, a representation of a current representation of a past sensation. That's basically what a memory in many ways is. It's more complex than that, but that's the start of memory. It's your current representation in your soul of the past, of yesterday's sensation of a carrot, and your current sensation of a carrot, and then your soul is able to compare these things. So your soul is a level up, as we've seen from our master argument. Remember, it's not just another sense. It's able to talk about comparing senses. Well, this is what we can do. So Plato noticed that we can make calculations or decisions or judgments or form beliefs upon these natural perceptions. And again, that's all part of the doxa game. Much more complicated, but that's on the way to knowledge. So far so good. We've made some advance over the simple notion of episteme is aesthesis. Well, we still haven't dug quite as deeply as I think we need to into this notion of what exactly perception really is. We got to dig a little bit deeper. But we're trying to rule out the notion of equating episteme with a simple form of aesthesis, like a simple sensation or a qualia or a raw feel. It's more advanced than that. So we do comparisons, evaluated. That you can say, well, not only is it the same as yesterday, the carrot taste, but, oh, this carrot is much fresher. So you can make evaluations, calculations of an evaluative nature. Yeah, these carrots are better today than they were yesterday. Or, no, yesterday's carrots were far better. So you're not just making assertions of identity and difference, but you can now qualify the differences that you make, like not just different, but better or worse. And these are operations that you just do in general, but they're important for figuring out exactly how knowledge is going to be articulated. And you make existential ones in the sense of the carrot taste that is current, this raw feel, it exists. It's an important one. To go from simply having the sensation to saying the sensation exists, that too is another example of doxa, or belief or judgment. So to go back to the previous examples of the newborn babies and puppies, yeah, they have the shivering, or they feel the hunger pangs, or they have their natural perceptions, but they don't have the conscious view that those sensations are existing. They're not attaching that notion of existence or that concept of existence or whatever. Existence has been a notoriously thorny property to articulate in philosophy. But here we're just kind of gliding over that whole problem and just thinking of it as a kind of property that gets attached to the raw feel, where you say, yeah, I am feeling right now this sensation of cold or heat or carrot taste, whatever you like. That is another example of doxa. So beliefs, judgments, etc., etc. So the point is that a judgment about sense experience is not sense experience. It's a judgment about it. It is, as I've been using this sort of spatial metaphor, it's a level up, right? Or a level down, a level deeper, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the thing is that it's different when you start making judgments about your qualia, about your sense, sort of this sense information that's coming in. All right. So, and of course, the judgment, the doxa, doesn't probably make any sense unless you have the natural perceptions, because it's operating on those natural perceptions. So these things are not radically separate, but they're not identical. So you have to keep them separated in the correct way. All right. So if it's an existential, you're talking about the existence, or, as I said, this is talking about existence. Or in many translations, it, shall we say, it reaches, again, with a spatial metaphor, the notion of reach and an activity. It's not simply passive, right? The senses are, in this sense, these are passive, but doxa implies a kind of activity. You're doing something. The soul is moving. There's emotion. And Socrates says sometimes instead of, talking about existence, he said it reaches being. Okay, so that's a rather formidable expression, but he's really talking about asserting the existence of something. So yes, when I say it's cold in here, it is, or I am currently feeling this existence of this sensation of cold, that's reaching being. And the important thing is that the senses don't reach being. They may give you some evidence or whatever by which the soul can reach being, but the senses themselves don't. They just give you some kind of it's they're of, well, I'll get to this in a second, they're of what is, but they don't give you that extra step up of commenting on it or believing or whatever. That's done by something other than the senses. So again, the senses don't give being, they don't give truth. And we're going to look a little bit more in detail. Okay, but do they give error? No, they don't give error either. And that's going to be something that I want to unpack a little bit more. But hang on for that. They don't give being and truth. Okay, hence no knowledge. So aesthesis is not the same as episteme. Okay, but judgments, and again, beliefs, right? Remember, that's all going to be under our notion of doxa. Now, let's recall something about what Plato said, or Socrates said earlier, 152c, 5-6, for perception. And again, I'm going to dig a little bit into this notion of perception, because ultimately, when we're talking about perception here, it's really more about sensation, right, at this lower level. All right, so we saw that perception is always of what is, so it's got a connection to what's existing, and it's also unerring. So these are two things that knowledge does have, right? And perception has them too, so that's great, but knowledge has them in a special way that Socrates says knowledge has the notion of being connected to what is and unerring in a way that befits knowledge. So it has these properties of connected to being and unerring, right, not giving error, in a special way for knowledge. So again, knowledge is like perception, but don't equate the two of them. All right, so this requires a little bit more unpacking. So let's take our time and work through it. Knowledge is not simply unerring. It does have that. Knowledge can't be an error. Like, it makes no sense to say, I know, and what you know is false. No. You can know that 2 + 2 is 6 is false, but you can't know 2 + 2 is 6. You have to be careful of that distinction. So you can know that some expression or some claim is false. Yes, like when you say to someone, I know you're lying, right? I know that what you said is not true. That is a report about what they said. Namely, that what they said, like the sky is green or whatever, or the moon is made of cheese. You can know that it is false that the moon is made of cheese, but you can't know the moon is made of cheese, because that would say and so falsity. That's not the same thing as knowing about it. You have to keep these concepts straight, or a lot of this discussion is just going to get very confusing. Another aspect to keep in mind is that knowledge is not simply unerring, but is tied to truth. And so unerring is not identical, not the same thing as tied to truth. That seems a little weird at first, but as we'll dig into this, you'll become a little bit clearer as what really is going on with what perception is, and that's why I want to introduce this notion, thinking back to the natural perceptions, these raw feels. So perception is going to be a much more complicated notion than these raw feels. So what we've really done here is get rid of this notion that episteme, knowledge, is like a raw feel, and why it's not like a raw feel, why it's not this simple sensation, and why perception is a much more complicated thing, and so why it's going to involve something like doxa. So we have a few more concepts to sort out, and so stay tuned, and I'm going to pick all that up and sort it out in the next video.